PioTrans has been granted an interdict against striking Rea Vaya workers in Johannesburg. The Labour Court has ruled the strike unlawful. Yesterday, workers employed by PioTrans embarked on a wildcat strike after a long-standing dispute on bonuses and salary increases that started earlier this month. Rea Vaya was placed under business rescue just over a week ago. Now, to tell us more about what unfolded today in the Labour Court is business rescue practitioner Mahier Tayob. Thank you so much for your time. That interdict coming out of court today, making it very clear about this wildcat strike and those moving forward.
Absolutely. So good afternoon to you and good afternoon to your listeners. So I'm very glad the way the court pronounced the way it did this morning. It obviously took into consideration the very urgency of the matter and also recognized the merit prior to the issuing of this order. And the court already made it known that lawlessness cannot be tolerated in any form by the order itself. And I want to inform your listeners that I would litigate to a point of exhaustion to ensure that the company's rights are protected. So the unions and non-unionized members must now adhere to this court order, failing which I have two alternatives. The first one is to apply for a contempt of court order and seek arrest. In the alternative, issue a second ultimatum notice and commence with dismissal. In my opinion, the future of their employment now rests solely in their hands by the election that they make. So as we now speak, one of the unions have already commenced negotiations with me, albeit belatedly. And I've been informed of, just in recent vintage, that the employees are contemplating returning to work tomorrow, and I remain hopeful that the intention will not sway between now and then. So we are elated with the court order, especially the urgency in which the court heard this matter.
Now, the timing of the strike as well could not have been great in terms of operations and those who rely on these services. I mean, Rea Vaya has been in a very fragile state, hence your services now as a business rescue practitioner. What impact would such a strike have on the operations that are already seemingly hampered?
Yes, obviously it's a severe impact. And the only reasons that the employees embarked during this time was so that you can have some form of leverage over the business rescue process. But thankfully the court recognized that as well. Ordinarily they could have done it into the holidays, but they didn't. They waited for this particular time.
So what happens to those disputes regarding bonuses and salary increases now with this court order? Does that mean it's back to the drawing board and to have negotiations around the table?
No, and this is the irony of it all. One of the unions already informed me that the members are accepting the proposal. The very proposal that was made to them before is now being accepted by them. After the entire court application, after the order was granted, they have now decided to accept it. So this negotiation could have been done before. But it's bizarre.
How would you describe your experience so far? I mean, you've recently come on board as the business rescue practitioner for this. How frustrating has the process been for you? Adding also, of course, such strikes as well into the mix and such concerns which may or may not be valid.
So let me first tell you of what I've seen. It's shocking. Just in one word, shocking. And to answer your question, obviously, because there is accountability that is being demanded, this is the pushback that we're going to receive. And it's normal. I expected that this will happen. Now that the courts have ruled, and I think the unions, the employees, and the creditors have seen that I'm determined to make sure that this business has to work, there would be second thoughts in anyone wanting to act in a way that's unsavory. That's why in the beginning I said that I would litigate to a point of exhaustion.
Now, you're saying you expected a pushback of sorts. What other kinds of pushbacks are you expecting and experiencing so far? And who wouldn't want this bus service, which services so many people who need this transport, not to succeed?
So it depends on from the purview of different people. If those who benefited would rather wish that this goes into liquidation, so everything of the indiscretions can be buried with it. So that would be the one side of it. The other side would want it to go down so the taxis can resume. They maybe it just depends from the purview of the participant.
And taking a look at all the evidence before you and everything that you have to go through, all the hoops and hurdles, how long until the business is actually rescued?
It's too difficult to say at the moment. But as we progress, this will be made available. And I think, just as a guesstimate, I would suspect that the plan would be drafted within 60 days. And from there onward, it will be very easy to determine how long it will take. But it's early days at the moment.
And just lastly, have the operations, since the business rescue process has started, have they been affected in any way?
Well, the operation is a complete disaster. If the board of directors, the board itself was bad, then the operations is a disaster. So I am in negotiations with the company called MAN to assist in outsourcing these operations to bring the for travel, so that I could make sure that we've covered that aspect as well. I do not want any culpability on my hands or in my hands.
So when you're saying it's a complete disaster, just put us in your privy, what are you finding?
Well, very simple. Buses are removed from the road for simple punches. Spares are being bought. There's no correlation between the actual spares and the bus that it's supposed to go into. And there is no stock control, there's no inventory, and nothing is functioning. It's an absolute disaster. And being an accountant, I'm being modest. When I tell you that it's a disaster.
Geez, I really appreciate the honesty. We certainly do, but that is quite a grim picture that you're painting there for us, even though it is the true picture of how it stands. So how can you be this confident that you can turn it around?
For two reasons. One, because the bleeding has already stopped, and number two, there is a ring fencing of creditors' amounts. So it becomes easy. Everything is possible when there is the will and there is the willingness from the parties. So I do believe it will. And if you listen to all of the interviews, the MMC, the city, they all stand from a unified position. Every department wants to see this work. We have to make it work. There's commuters that we owe this to. And I do believe it will work.
You've made one example of how the bleeding has stopped, as you've put it. If you could just give us some of the mechanisms that you've used to make sure that the bleeding has stopped. What are some of the solutions that have already been put in place?
For one, a complete freeze of the banking accounts. No expenses will be incurred without my absolute permission. I would go through every single invoice to make sure that it is absolutely necessary. There has to be 3 quotations for everything. It must be properly done. And we find that if we outsource it, some of the repairs is cheaper than doing it internally because they are no longer inflated prices that we're paying. So a lot of the systems are working, and the bleed will stop. There is sufficient profit for us to meet. Although we overstaff, I still believe we can make it work. I'm confident that we can make it work.
And just on that confidence, your final message to motorists and pedestrians and all those who are in need of this service?
For once, I want to start with an apology from the beginning. I want to start with an apology. This was unintended, but as I said previously, there are times where you've got to be flexible and times that you have to be assertive. I was assertive. I undertook to go to court. I've done just that, and I was successful in court. I assure you that I will do everything in my power to make sure that this works and to have no further inconvenience for our commuters. I'm hopeful that it can happen. It cannot be absolute.
Sure. Well, all the best to you, Mahier Tayob. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. That was business rescue practitioner Mahier Tayob, following the interdict that has come out of the courts today, preventing the PioTrans workers from going on that wildcat strike.